Well, we're continuing discussing these stories in Mark 5, and it's not quite the review time, but we're kind of reviewing them, but we're looking at them at different angles. Here's something that I'll try and zip through, and I could talk a lot, as you know, but this is really kind of cool. Let's compare the collection of these stories of miracles again. We have in the stories of chapter 5 here, we have that, I've talked about this a lot, and you can go back and listen to them if you don't understand, but uncleanness and ceremonial impurity. Like the woman with the issue of blood, for example, or the demonized among the tombs and pigs. So each of these stories has it. Isn't that interesting? Chapter 5, every story in chapter 5 has this story about ritual uncleanness. The Jewish tradition said that if you're bleeding a lot, you're ceremonially unclean. You can't go to the church and things like that, or synagogue or temple. And there's just restrictions on you. And then, and by the way, this is in the Old Testament, but there's reasons for it. We're not going to get into it. Just there are good reasons why God did that. He's showing them, he's teaching people something here, which we're not going to get into, otherwise it'll be really long. But just realize it. Just kind of say, okay, let's take this view at this. The demonized guy was among tombs, dead people, tombs. And there's a story of the pigs, a ceremonially unclean animal. They're unclean animals, right? They're pigs. So that's in this story. There's this uncleanness and ceremonially impurity. And then the woman bleeding, definitely, they were counted as unclean. And then the dead girl was unclean in the sense that, we're not talking about dirt on their bodies or something, it's just ceremonially, death. And so all three of them had that in that story. And yet Jesus delivered, and touched. It doesn't say he touched the demonized guys, but she touched him, and he touched her, the dead 12-year-old girl. So Jesus is kind of teaching something, I think. He's breaking through the old law and showing a new one. That old law is now passing away, and the new one is here. It's a new way of looking at things. He has a reason for sharing that old law. I'm not going to go into it, but right now he's like breaking through that. And he's saying, there's a change happening. The kingdom of heaven is near, and it's here. That's cool. Next one. The females were valued, the woman and the girl. And I think that's pretty significant. And I've said it a lot, and if you study that time period, and even centuries of this, millennia, where societies in the past, and even nowadays in certain countries, women are not valued as much. They're looked down upon by some in the societies, not all of it. The countries, the governments, they just, like in that time period, they couldn't go to court and be a witness. They saw murder, they weren't allowed to testify to it. Things like that. And women were just not, they were second class in the eyes of people. Jesus comes along and takes time and values women over and over and over and over in the Gospels. He kind of planted the seeds that kind of broke through and is still changing the world today. Voting rights in America came, and I think it's all based in the Judeo-Christian is what it's called, like way back roots and Jesus Christ came and valued women. First person that he decided to appear to prove that he was really going to appear, resurrect, is Miriam. There's different Marys in the Bible. Mary Magdalene. Wow. And look which one he did. She had 7 demons in her, and so he went to her. Wow. Behold Jesus. Look at him. Take a good look at that. So he lets that woman touch. He brings her up in front of the crowd to testify, like a witness, like in court, although it wasn't a judge in a court. Wow, Jesus. And then the little girl, he takes time to go touch that girl and deliver her and meet her needs. Next one. In story after story, there were crowds. There was a gathering of the village when Jesus had delivered the gatherings. Bunch of crowds of people were gathered from the village to say, leave us. They didn't like him to be there. And then with Jairus, there were tons of crowds. Remember, they pressed him. It was so crowded that the disciples were shocked that Jesus said, "Who touched me?" You know, Peter especially was the one who spoke up and said, "Jesus, who touched you?" Well, you see all the crowds were all kind of rubbing shoulders and all that. You know, what do you mean, who touched you? And then there were a lot of crowds there. And at the home of Jairus, remember that? There was a crowd of people mourning Jairus. And he had more than like 3 or 4 mourners. He probably had more. Richer people had a lot. He hired them and all that. So here's another thing. The status of the people. He has a couple guys who are really wild and violent against themselves and kind of scary out in the grave tombstones in Gadara or Garissa, one of those spots. Or the second one is a poor woman. She was broke. She spent all her living. She had nothing left. And I love that God, you know, allows us to go down to nothing sometimes when we're desperate. He allows us to be sort of broken and it's like, oh, I don't have anything, but no more hope, and then you turn to God. It's kind of showing how we need him. And so, you know, the poor, she was poor. That's her status. The Jewish male, an actual ruler of the synagogue, that was a high status. He was a leader in that city. People respected him. Idadas. You know, they absolutely respected him. He was a leader. He was a ruler in the synagogue. He's the one that conducted the services and many other things. So I went over that list. And that's significant in this story, that Jesus didn't skip him and say, well, you're just a leader. I'm going to go to the poor people. No, he went with the rich too. Or maybe he was rich. I don't know. But, or at least he was a leader. We know that. And then the next thing is a young girl. He valued that girl, that precious little 12-year-old. He said, little girl, rise up. You know, so just comparing those stories, like the author's really sharing these stories. Maybe some of them are in order. I think Jairus and that woman definitely happened at the time, you know, and the Gadarenes were before that too. So this is definitely, I think, in order at this point. But still, there's so many interesting things throughout the unclean thing, we didn't talk about in this video, the faith and not faith. That was really important. And then you have the status of these people, like I just mentioned. So just one thing after another, you know, is just pretty fascinating. The females that he took time and really ministered to them, very, very cool. So, all right, very good. Hope you're getting some more out of this. I'm enjoying talking about it. We're kind of finishing up with these stories in a little bit. We'll be doing a review too a little bit. But I have something else I'm going to share before that. All right, God bless.